So I want us to go ahead and begin the show tonight, and I think that one thing I would like to do is probably open the show with it sounds more like a riddle than anything else. So what does Jackie Gleason, President Nixon, Donald Rumsfeld, and the ex-CIA Director Bush have in common, other than some warped humor, other than Jackie Gleason? Well, you're going to listen, you're going to hear Robert VanDerClock talk about what they have in common in this next excerpt from a show that was aired November 28th, and the title of the show was UFOs, What Price for Acclamation? So let's listen to Robert VanDerClock tell us how those four people are and what they have in common.
I want to start off with something that happened on October 11th, just last month. Tom DeLonge has been involved in UFO research for some time. He is the former frontman for the band called Blink-182. I'm sure a number of you have heard of that band. He had a press conference on October 11th with about 3 or 4 very important people, government higher-ups, we'll call it. And what they were doing is they were creating an academic institution called To the Stars Academic, I'm trying to think of the right words of it, it's a study of the academics and the arts, and it's relating to UFO technology and research.
Right.
Some people were involved in the Department of Defense, the Institute of Advanced Engineering, CIA, and Skunk Works, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and they're basically all getting together and creating this institution that's going to discuss and analyze the uses of alien technology and how it relates to our society. And there's not too much more to say about that right now. They're looking for people to invest in this thing, and I know that I have over 700 the last time I checked. I'm sure you can check that out on YouTube if you want to. It's To the Stars called, with Tom DeLonge. And I thought that was very interesting. It's just, for me, it's another step toward disclosure. Some people are saying that they're really looking for investment money and they're not really concerned with truth or anything. But if you saw these names, these people, and the props that they have and the backgrounds, you'd know this is for real. And I understand one or two of these people retired just a day or two before this happened, so that they're off the hook. So that's a good thing.
Interesting.
I want to bring up Jackie Gleason, one of my all-time favorite comedians. I know there's a lot of listeners out there that have heard stories about something to do with Jackie Gleason and UFOs and this, that, and the other. So I thought I'd read an excerpt for you from a report that was done from a very close friend of mine. I wanted, and basically it confirms what the rumors were. And I'm not going to go into the name of the interviewer. He's an absolutely trustworthy person and a longtime friend of mine. And so I want to read a little bit to you, if that's okay. And the interviewer, I'll leave his name out, but I'm going to read directly in front of you his report, and it concerns direct conversations and face-to-face comments from Jackie Gleason himself. And Jackie Gleason, most of you should know, the great one, a great comedian, Honeymooners legend, and all the great characters. He's one of my all-time favorites. So I was really excited many years ago to find out that he had a passionate, heavy, intense interest in UFOs, and to find out what he did about it. So let me read. Gleason was excited to be hearing about UFO cases from someone who has worked directly with NASA astronauts. When I say I'm talking about the interviewer here. I told him I also worked with many former German scientists, notably Werner von Braun, and many NASA astronauts like Neil Armstrong, James Irwin, John Glenn, and others, some of whom have made history for walking on the world other than Earth. I met John F. Kennedy twice at Cape Canaveral as well. I was proud to have the respect of such a genius of comedy, music, and acting talents with a deep interest in UFOs, and then Gleason admitted something he had experienced to me that I was very familiar with. He said, "Look, I'll tell you this because of your work with these courageous people. I was doing a guest appearance on a show one night. One of the early astronauts was there. I asked who that was, and he said, I could recall it was Gordon Cooper. So we introduced ourselves to each other, and we departed from the crowd and went away from the other guests, and I asked him, are UFOs fact or fiction? Cooper said he had seen such craft in our atmosphere in Europe and in the USA, and that they do exist. And he said the government knows the truth but will not allow it to be released. Now, this is Gleason thinking to himself, my God, a NASA astronaut saying UFOs are a fact. My God, our government won't allow people to learn the truth. Damn it, I nearly wet my pants. And that's a quote, okay? So then the interviewer says, yes, I talked with Cooper several times, was told the same story, and it's apparently a fact. Yes, it is, Jackie. Then Gleason began an astonishing tale of the famous Nixon-Gleason trip to Homestead Air Base in Florida. He said, look, I have never admitted to anyone that President Nixon was with me during the trip. Only Beverly, my second wife, knew that Dick was personally involved. I asked who Beverly was, and Gleason said, that's my wife. You know how wives are. That's what he's saying anyway. So I replied, the interviewer replied to him, I've kept many secrets and will be very confidential concerning his and President Nixon's trip there. Gleason then said in 1972, said, no, maybe it was 73, according to he was questioning the year. But I can't recall the exact date, but one of those days in February, I was at my charity golf event, and Nixon was a special guest. Later, Gleason recalled that he was contacted that evening by Nixon and told that he would be there to pick Gleason up at his home late that night and did not really expect to hear from the president again that day and wondered what was going on that late at night. Gleason said he expected a presidential motorcade of the usual Secret Service cars and that of President Nixon. He heard a single car arrive at his home. He thought it was one of his business associates, and to his total surprise, it was the president, and he was alone. How could that be? He was always totally covered by Secret Service agents, as any president would experience on a 24-hour basis. He said Nixon didn't like that kind of total security. So very puzzled, Gleason entered the car with Nixon driving. As Nixon drove south past Miami, they both discussed the mystery of UFOs. He was not surprised to hear Nixon talk about the subject. They talked quietly and briefly about it during that afternoon at the golf course. The president was very interested in the same subject as well. As they approached Homestead Air Base, he finally spun the secret to Jackie. He told Gleason that they were going there to view alien creatures and their craft, which were stored in a secured area within a hangar at the Air Force Base. At first, Gleason thought he was joking, and he laughed, and Nixon was not laughing. They arrived at the security gate and were stopped by a young MP, and I, the interviewer, interrupted Gleason and said the MP was probably an Air Police guard. Gleason said, yes, he was an Air Force man. Jackie then added that a most trusted personal assistant, well known in U.S. politics, President Nixon, stepped forth and greeted both men. Gleason knew the identity of the person but would not disclose the name to me for obvious reasons. He said he was about 38 to 40 years old. This individual had preceded both of us to the base and had already cleared the president to go into Homestead Air Base. The assistant was apparently aware of what was stored there, Gleason said, with certain statements Nixon had made to him. Later, McClellan learned through an Office of Naval Investigation officer that this assistant was probably Captain Donald Rumsfeld, also a former naval aviator. I told this visiting naval officer that said Rumsfeld had trained him earlier in his Navy flying career. In 1973, Rumsfeld was again in the USA from Belgium for top-level consultations regarding his new position and would have important assignments to keep me involved in the future Gerald Ford presidency. Apparently, Nixon realized that his arrival without a personal army of Secret Service agents would cause concern, so he had his trusted, knowledgeable assistant there to quell that alarm. Gleason thought that the Air Military Police approval to have them enter and to be met and eventually to be guided was a miracle or perhaps a military fluke. He wondered how long it could be before the irresponsible and missing Secret Service agents would be informed by the Air Force and swiftly begin showing up. I asked Gleason if any Air Force security personnel asked any questions whatsoever concerning the lack of the usual Secret Service personnel accompanying him. He said, no, not as far as he recalled. There was nothing said. They all seemed aware of the arrival due to his presidential assistant being there. He continued driving into the base, and Nixon seemed to know exactly where to go. He drove to a far end of the base, and a lone U.S. Air Force lieutenant wearing a security clearance badge met them and accompanied the two distinguished men to the hangar entrance. The officer apparently was aware that the president and Gleason would be arriving. They entered a large hangar with an assigned single unarmed military police escort. Again, Nixon appeared to know exactly where they were going. Gleason whimsically asked Nixon in a low tone, he said, have you been here before? And with a smile, he said, yes, presidents go wherever they please. Both men walked a short distance to another large door with an escort following behind. The escort remained at the chamber's entrance on the orders of the president. Nixon asked Gleason to watch his step as they entered the facility. The president pointed out many containers that were holding large and smaller damaged parts of what appeared to be various wreckage of a craft that had been torn apart by some sort of explosion or implosion. The president commented that it was part of the ship that these aliens had been flying. Gleason was flabbergasted to hear these details. Gleason reached out to touch a piece of the wreckage, and Nixon stopped him. Gleason then was amazed to view several medical examination slabs encased in a separate refrigerated container with what appeared to be embalmed, small alien bodies laying on them. Gleason looked at me and said, Mac, I was never so amazed in my life. My God, there were bodies of small things, dead beings, which I'd never seen before. They appeared childlike in physical shape, small in appearance, except that they were older-looking creatures, not youthful as children would appear. Large, hairless heads, slightly wrinkled faces, large sunken eyes, and a small mouth, and what were apparently 2 ears, which were just holes in their head. He said they had a fragile body with small hands and feet. They were about 3 to 4 feet tall, their skin appearing to have been damaged by extreme heat in certain bodily areas of 2 separate aliens. Skin color was hard to determine. It apparently looked to be a light tan or an off-color tannish blue or gray. So I, the interviewer, asked Gleason, how many aliens were there? And he said he saw 4 creatures, one on each enclosed slab that they viewed, and said there were about 6 to 8 such freezers, and they did not peer into all of them. Gleason then said that Nixon reared his head toward him and mumbled a bit, and then mentioned another incident that had happened in what we thought was recalled being in the early 60s, but he was not entirely sure. He told Jackie that he and another White House trusted advisor were privately shown a 16-millimeter film that was reputed to be a movie of a factual event that had happened earlier. Gleason asked him if he could give any details. Nixon said he was told that 2 or 3 crafts were detected approaching a major U.S. Air Force base in New Mexico. Said he thought it was Holloway or some such name, and I'm sure they're talking about Holloman here. Nixon described viewing 2 or 3 tall-looking alien creatures egressing the craft and being met by Air Force officers, and they appeared to be greeting each other. He was told the officers and a single alien were directed to a secured building where they held a meeting. Nixon said he was not privy as to what information they exchanged, and he was seriously considering releasing the incident for public scrutiny. This is Nixon now. Who was urgently influenced against doing so by a CIA director, George Herbert Walker Bush, Sr., and his security aides on the staff, who may have been Rumsfeld and Cheney. According to remarks from President Nixon to Gleason, Bush Sr. apparently told the president that he had no need to know. Gleason said, hell, the president has no need to know what's going on here. And the interviewer said, a lot's going on, Jackie. I informed Gleason that I was aware of the alleged alien ship disclosure, and it was allegedly at Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico. Gleason made a comment, you do know a lot, do you, young man? And I said, yes, Jackie, and much more since I began investigating UFOs myself. There are things that would enlighten a few or possibly cause great fear among many in the human race. Gleason said, enlighten me, Mac. And we'll stop there, because we have other subjects to discuss. But this is straight from the mouth of Jackie Gleason, and a gentleman who was very heavily involved with NASA for 34 years. I don't know what your audience thinks of that, but, when you start to hear things that you can take to the bank, it makes you wonder.
That was an excerpt from our show in November of 2017. The show was entitled, What Price for Acclamation? If you want to hear more, and certainly there's a lot more to that show that I did not include in that excerpt, you can go to the website, www.blogtalkradio.com/ancient myths_modern mysteries, and finish listening to that show segment. Our next selection, it's one thing to listen to famous people that are in the know, like maybe President Nixon, Rumsfeld, Bush, and others. It's one thing to listen to them talk about them and what they know. It's another thing to listen to people like you and me. And our next segment was from our December 4th show when Robert VanDerClock interviewed a lady by the name of Roxanne, where she describes a close encounter experience. So let's listen to Roxanne and Robert VanDerClock discuss that.
Yeah, this is a friend of mine. I've known her almost as long as I've known Lenny. This is Roxanne, as far as I remember, and
yes.
I know she's going to be telling something that's very important here. I don't know how long you've been holding on, but I'm sorry, I didn't realize you'd been trying to call in before. I didn't know that you had attempted with any problems or anything. But welcome to the show. I'm glad to have you.
Thank you, Bob.
Why don't you take it right from there and then tell why you're here?
Well, I understand you wanted to talk about the incident in Saddle River.
Absolutely.
All right. We'll go over that quickly because I understand you have another guest coming in.
No, actually, we haven't introduced our one of our regular hosts, Thomas, yet. But we want to make sure he has adequate time. But treat it as you just called in and you have something you want to say. And
all right. Well, I've had many active experiences where UFOs are concerned over my lifetime. But my husband has been an avid a skeptic for all of this time. I've been married to him for 51 years, and he has poo-pooed every single moment of it until March 12th, 2010. It was a late Friday afternoon, and it was sometime around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and he was off looking at a job in Saddle River, New Jersey. Well, I get a call from him. It was quite a while. He was running late, and I was wondering what was going on because he was slated to be home at least an hour earlier than what I was expecting. So I get a call, and he sounded very strange, and I thought that he'd had an accident or something because he didn't sound right. I've never known him to sound so frightened. He said to me, I'm coming home right away. He said, something has happened. And I thought, oh, my God, something physical has happened, or he's had an accident, or he's sick. So he hangs up the phone, and he comes home, and the whole time I'm waiting on pins and needles for him to pull in the driveway. Finally he gets home. He walks in the house, and his face is, half of his face is ash white. I mean, he's just looks so horrible. The other half of his face is burned. It looked like he'd been standing out in the sun for quite a while. Now, seeing that it was March and it was late in the day and it wasn't springtime yet, that was very unusual to see a burn on his face. And I said, what's wrong? He said, something's happened to me. And I said, you better sit down and tell me what's going on. Well, he sat down and he started to tell me the most extraordinary story that I'd ever heard out of his mouth. He told me that while he was waiting to see this one fellow for a job in Saddle River, he was wasting some time in driving around the town. It's a beautiful town, Saddle River. It's accentuated by a lot of rolling hills and little cul-de-sacs and very charming homes, a lot of big houses, and a lot of woods. Well, apparently he was on a hill, and he was coming up a rise on one of the hills in Saddle River, and there was a deep glen to his left, and it was kind of misty. It was kind of a lousy day. It had been rainy. There was a little bit of snow on the ground. There was a little bit of a fog, and there was enough of a temperature rise that there was a heavy mist. Well, all of a sudden, off to his left hand, out of his left hand peripheral vision, he sees something rising up out of a glen, out of this hollow, wherever it was to his left. It came up very slowly, and as it came up, he had the sensibility to take his cell phone, turn to his left, and snap a picture of this thing as it came up. And it was a UFO. And he was so startled, he turned to take his phone to take another picture, and as he turned again, it was gone. It had shot up and it was gone. Well, he said the whole event might have been, to his recollection, 15 to 20 seconds. But after that time, he became disoriented, and he drove around, and he doesn't remember how long he drove around until he finally called me. He finally came to his senses, and he called me and said that he was coming home. And so he sat down. He was very shaken. And I noticed. I said, half of your face is sunburned. And I said, your ear is blistering. And I said, look at your hand. His left hand, where he held his cell phone, was burned. And I said, you better go take a look in the mirror. And I shouldn't have said that because he was scared enough already. And when he looked in the mirror, he was more alarmed. And I called friends of mine. I called you, and I called another friend of mine who was with MUFON. And we all convened, and he was still shaken when everybody sat down at the kitchen table and started to go over the details. Now, he didn't want to go to MUFON with this because he has a business, and he didn't want anybody saying anything that negative about him because of his position in business. So the whole thing was never reported. But the only ones that really knew about it were he and I and our close friends, you being one and my other close friend with MUFON the other. But we did drive around for a considerable length of time over the next couple of days, trying to locate where it actually happened, because my husband, although he was very shook up, he couldn't remember where it was. He couldn't remember where he was. He could not place where the event took place, and he knows every square inch of Bergen County, New Jersey. I mean, the man has worked in all of these towns for a number of decades, and he certainly wouldn't forget where he was, but he couldn't remember. And it appears to me at that time, and I didn't say anything to him at the time, but I do believe he lost some time. So whatever happened during that time frame that he thought was 15 to 20 seconds, I believe it was longer than that, and I think that I think that they wanted him to see them. I don't think that they ever let anybody see them unless you were supposed to see them. And he couldn't get a handle on it. He didn't want to talk about it anymore. As a matter of fact, since 2010, I don't think that we've had any more than 3 conversations about it, and he always seems to drop the subject. But eventually the sunburn subsided. He seemed to have had a little knot in his left ear, and that seemed to have gone away. I don't know what that was all about. But there was a strange thing that happened over the 7 years since that occurrence. Every spring, and this is a God's gospel truth, Bob, every spring, right about that time, he develops a redness like a rash redness on the left side of his face. So it seems to have an anniversary, and he does experience some of the physical manifestations of that event from 2010. But it traumatized him, especially being a skeptic that he is. It traumatized him tremendously. So that's basically the whole story, and you know the rest. And that's it.
Can I add something to this?
Yeah, sure. Sure.
On the day of our being made aware of this, which was March 13th, the next day, and this includes our friend Diane Radio Art. I was exactly 2 weeks away from retiring from what was a 37-year postal career, which began its first 6.5 years in, guess where, Saddle River, New Jersey. Okay? And if you remember, a bunch of us went in the car, and I was able to pinpoint the spot based on his descriptions. And for those of you friends of mine who live in the Saddle River area, the only thing I'll tell you is the side street off of East Saddle River Road, and that's all you need to know. We got over there and figured it out where it was, and I know you had made independent measurements of everything. The distance from the car to the vehicle, the distance from the vehicle to the 2 trees that were in front of it, rather. And we did everything we could possibly do in either a scientific or unscientific way. Folks, this happened. And Roxanne, I not only credit you for standing tall through this, and you've had to, for having the courage to come to this show and do this. And we really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Just one more thing, Bob. I heard part of what you were saying earlier, and you mentioned the development of night vision. I just want to let you know that my cousin, a doctor, he's a PhD, he worked with the military, and he developed black light for the military.
Wow.
Yeah.
Small world, my friend.
Yeah, it is a small world. Yeah. Very, very interesting what Lenny had to say. Very, very interesting. And it's nice. It's good to hear his voice.
Sure. And if any of the listeners might have been possibly thinking about keeping score here, there's 5 of us now in on this presentation, and 3 of us, myself, Lenny, and you, are all witnesses to what happened to your husband.
Yes, that's right.
Evidence for something going on, and I was thinking about that when the formulation of the show was coming around. And so there's 3 of us have all seen it, and anybody wants to question our integrity, go for it.
That's right. Well, what's really very very interesting to me was that for years, my husband scoffed at, of the things that have happened to me. Another one of which he was He was with me when it occurred, two of them actually, and he still scoffed. But when he was all alone and he didn't have somebody to attest to what he witnessed, all of a sudden the shoe was on the other foot, and then he needed somebody to believe him. To believe him telling a story about what seems to be very unbelievable to most people. So then he understood how it feels to have somebody say that can't possibly be true. If it wasn't for a sunburn, I might have had a question or two. But for the sunburn, I really did believe exactly what happened to him.
Well, again, it dovetails into a statement I made earlier in the broadcast. Does it have to happen to you before you finally understand the nature and enormity of this phenomena and what potentially happens with it? And if you
it's life-changing. I mean, it changes your paradigm. I mean, it just shifts everything that you were taught to believe. And, and then there you are. You all of a sudden you have a whole new belief structure.
That's true. And if you remember, the three of us researchers, yourself, myself, and Lenny, we had a little powwow over this. We tried to figure out you guys are looking at me like, hey, what's happened here? And I said, I really don't know. Let me look into my files and see if I can come up with something. And I did.
Yeah.
We took a little. If you remember, I just happened to be reading a UFO book at the time that covered this exactly in a chapter I hadn't gotten to yet. And it was written. The book is called CE5, 240 Cases of Alien Human Contact.
I'd love to see that book. I don't. If you shoot me an email and let me know where I can pick up a copy of that, I'd like to read it.
Not a problem.
It might be tough to find.
Well, then I'll just send you my copy. That's all. No problem. What I was going to say, it's important to know about this book, folks, because it was put together by Dr. Richard Haynes, who was a senior scientist for NASA. He ran the Ames Research Center in Longview, California for them for years, and he wasn't very indirectly involved, I understand, in the 747 incident, Pan Airlines. And one chapter concerned this kind of incident. It turns out in his book, he said that as of 2005, there had been 23 reported cases in America of exactly that, what your husband was. And
really?
He pointed out and said that, well, that's the ones that were reported anyway. There might have been 100 for all we know.
Sure. I know that my husband wouldn't report it.
Right.
Yeah.
And we were able to assess it from that. So apparently what had happened to your husband is he got microwave level burns on his face and hands. It's one hand, and that's not too serious. Those things are a low level wave radiation, and they kind of went away, as I remember, in about a week or so, right?
They did, yes. But I found it to be fascinating that he came to me last year and he said, "Look at this." He said, every year, he said, I never spoke to you about this, but every year about this time, he said my left side of my face gets red again, and he said it's just like it was in 2010. I thought that was extraordinary. It's like a cellular memory.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Ask him the next time when March 12th rolls around. Hey, can I take a picture?
Yeah, a few months away, but I think we'll do that.
Well, the only evidence we have of this right now is that photograph of what it took.
That's right. That's right.
And it's important to note.
Thank God we have that.
Yeah. Listen, anyway, thank you very much for being part of this. I'm going to suggest to Ron that we be
Yes,
soon.
You're welcome, Bob. Thank you for having me on.
Once again, that excerpt was taken from our December 4th show entitled UFOs Applied Technology. Go to